Hey folks, welcome to the show, episode 112. Who runs the AFL with the rule changes? It's been a very big, hot topic, folks. Whether it's from the umpiring to the rule changes since before the start of the season. And we'll actually talk about how many rules are changed in the last decade to go with it, folks. So it's quite an interesting podcast. We're going to talk about who runs the AFL from the head to the toe. We're going to talk about the recent rule changes as well. We're going to talk a little bit about Greg Swan's comment about the umpire and how it's been arguably the best he's seen. So we're going to delve straight into that, folks. We're going to talk about some factual evidence of rule changes as well. We're going to talk about who runs it, who handles it, and who signs off on it. It's going to be a very important episode, actually. It's quite a good one. You don't quite hear the information talked in this way. We're going to talk about the processes that happen, who the head honcho is, who signs off on it. So, and we're going to talk about the rules. And some of it's going to be positive, some of it's going to be like, no, that just shouldn't have changed it. So it's going to be, and we're doing this to make positive change so we get a better outcome for the game and to make the game a better game. So that being said, like I said, they've been made to have dozens of changes of decisions over the last 10 years. But the AFL has tweaked the rules or interpretation in at least 8 of the last 10 seasons. So 80% of the last 10 seasons have been some sort of change towards the rule. I started off with that because it's a continuation. Okay? If we were to look back in time, should they have just left it? Should they have only changed stuff that has a positive outcome and doesn't put the game into what we call jeopardy and the integrity of the game? So we've had 8 of those seasons out of 10, and the biggest clusters of rule changes came around 2017 to 2019, 2021, and especially in the 2025-26 area. So that's the most recent one. So that's the change where Greg Swan comes in. But as you can talk about the clusters of change, so we've got the actual year things started changing a bit in the game, 2019, like there was changes like, the umpire didn't have to tell the player that he's reported and the reasoning of it, which confuses players. Now is the whole situation we had not too long ago. But that being said, there's been a large amount of rules changed. Standing rule implemented in 2021 or after that, I would assume. One that people weren't too happy about. The sub rule come and gone like twice. Lots of different ones, but we're going to zone in a bit on the most recent changes because that's where the large chunk of it has been. So we'll talk a bit about Greg Swan is the AFL footy operations role. That's what he does. And July last year is when he was brought in. And 7 on-field rule changes for the 2026 season. Well, the last disposal out of bounds between the arcs. We touched base on that. And we had the whole situation in Geelong versus Adelaide where it come off the Geelong player's foot, Atkins. And essentially, it came off Atkins' foot and it should have been a free kick to the Crows, but they continued play, went down the other end, Jack Martin kicked a goal. So then we had the incident on the weekend where they cancelled the play like 90 seconds into it roughly. I'm not exactly sure the exact count, but we'll go. It was a fair chunk of play. So you're telling me that they couldn't call it back? I've seen calls called back. So not only that, they allowed a goal to be kicked when they could have just looked at it and reviewed it. So this stems back to even then. I did say that on the podcast during it. It's the lasso rule. So we've talked a bit about that. No more starting in the goal square at the centre bounces for players that are not obviously outside of the centre square. Stronger stand rule enforcement. Now that one's just a stupid one. So some players, for example, in last night's game, it's good one. It cost 50 metres. Cam McKenzie tried to get to the mark to stand on the mark, but he was told, why can't a player run to the mark and stand on it? It's so stupid. It is the most stupidest thing I've ever seen. And not only that, there was a play where Dacos wasn't on the mark. He was in the vicinity, and the umpire said, move Nick Dacos, instead of giving the 50. Now, I don't mind the umpire saying to move for a player, but if that was another player who might have not had the star power, it would have just been called 50 metres straight away. That's what I think. That's my view on that one. They're so in between on it. Some umpires are hot. They'll just punish players bang like that. Some will just give a warning like that. I think it's crap. I think the whole stand rule's crap, personally. So that was just more changes on top of more changes. There's a few here. Obviously, the ruck contest tweaks. No centre bounce to start the play, which is just stupid. We did a whole podcast on the centre bounce. Check it out. The history of the centre bounce, the reason why they did it, etc. It is a great episode. And they're taking away a traditional part of the game. So Greg Swan's come in and made not much positive change from what I can see. And we're positive on this podcast. We're not here to just be negative. We're just talking about why it doesn't work and why it's not a positive change. Okay, we're all about changes to be positive. The centre bounce is no longer there. That rewards umpires who can't bounce the ball. So they shouldn't be umpiring to start with if they can't bounce the ball. Just like a player can't bounce the ball. Should be a requirement. Should be AFL standard. If you go for a test and you don't get the answers right, you don't get an A+. You get a B. If you get enough of the minimum standards, you just get a C. Okay? Stop allowing the minimum to be lowered each time, because it's not right. This is a standard of football that should be applied in all aspects of the game. It's not a knock on umpires. It's about making the umpires better and a positive change. The ruck contest where they run over, they might jump over the line. There was 3 of them last night. I think there was almost 3 in a row, particularly with the Hawthorn ruckman. Meek jumped up. I noticed he jumped up. He jumped and made the attempt to go for the ruck, but because he's jumping in midair, he's not made contact with the other ruckman and he's gone over the line. That's just stupid. Absolute stupid. We've seen Grundy weave his way out and then made the other player sidestep over the line. It's stupid. Stupid. I've done rucking, we've talked enough about that on the podcast. This isn't about me, but seriously, as a ruckman, it's just the most ridiculous rule. Why don't they ask any of the ruckmans? I can guarantee it, all the ruckmans, they're happy to jump. They should have just made the rule that you have to jump at the centre square, not like this whole line stuff. You should be able to jump wherever you want. And if you go over the line as you've jumped over the line, what does that matter? They've jumped and made the contest. Like, there are going to be times where they miss each other and they'll go over the line. You shouldn't get punished for it. It's stupid. It just should be the fact that they have to jump at the rucking contest. Okay, maybe not body on body. That's what they want to stop. Well, the requirement is you have to jump. It doesn't matter where you jump. You just have to jump. And the umpire can pay a free kick for the player not contesting the ball at the centre bounce to jump. So 2 things they should have made change to be better is that, and crossing the line is not going to matter. They have to start behind the line anyway. If they jump over the line, that's just a part of the game. Simple as that. They tried to make more rules to speed up the game. like with an 8-second rule when kicking out and went off the mark, which is hit and miss sometimes. They let players have as long as 8 seconds. Sometimes they just call play on, okay? Then we've had a whole draft bidding rules change this week. So, yeah, there's been a big shake-up to the draft for 2026, mainly about father-son academies and NGA players. And the changes, the clubs now can only use 2 picks to match the bid, and only up to pick 36 where they have to match up to. So now they've, instead of lower, so I'll finish off what I have to say and we'll get to that. There's also a ladder-based loading. 2 top teams pay 20% more, prelim teams pay 10% more, and the bottom 5 clubs get a second round compensation pick. It is the first rounders. If their first rounder gets pushed back, they get the extra pick. It's also about making the clubs pay a fair price of stacking their late picks. So look, it's supposed to be about protecting the weaker teams. Well, no, they do get extra pick, but to me, a lot didn't need to change because lower teams like Port Adelaide, who didn't finish inside the 8 last year, I'm just going to use my team as an example. I could use Carlton as well. They didn't finish in the 8. Both sides, they had an average year, and they went to stack their picks, getting ready for this year. And as I said, from 2026, clubs can only use a maximum of 2 picks to match any bid on father-son academies. And we just said about that. But also, yeah, to me, it's making... So if Port want Dougie Cochran and Carlton want Cody Walker, they're going to have to really use their first and second round picks they got. I'm not sure. I know Carlton's got 2 first rounders because I have one from this year and one from Sydney that they got for Kernow. Port, well, they're not. They've probably got 1, and I think they got 2 second rounders from what I understand. So it's going to put a strain on them. So essentially, they need the amount of picks to equal the points. You know, I think it's whatever is 4,000 points to the picks that we get. But that being said, they can only use 2. Okay, so that's going to force clubs. That's going to force lower clubs that who it's not going to fix the situation because higher clubs can trade out picks because it's not as warranted. They don't need to use them as much. They can then load up on the year after. Lower clubs, they have the ability to move their picks around a bit more. But now they've lose traction to move picks around. So it's and also the timing of it. So the timing's horrible. So clubs set up their draft for 2 or 3 years in advance. So Port didn't even pick any players last year. I know it's my team. I'm not trying to be like sound like it's hypocritical or anything because that's not where I want to come from it. Because there's multiple clubs and it's going to affect every single club. And the one issue people were upset with was the fact that it was the states like Queensland that have the Gold Coast, Brisbane, and also the New South Wales states like teams like GWS, the Giants, and then also the Sydney Swans. Now their ability to get players and how wide their pool is who they can draft is the problem. They have the ability to draft so many more players from that area. So instead of actually making it about picks and then trying to cap the picks, they've not actually capped the region that they can pick these players from. There's been no change to that. That's the one thing people were... okay, Gold Coast use a lot of lower picks and etc. But it wouldn't have mattered because they'll still be able to go for the players they want to get. Once they trade to get those picks or trade out a player to get those picks, they're still going to be able to have access to the players. Yes, it is going to be harder for them to pick the players, but they're still going to have access to them. So if they make sacrifices to get the picks, they're still going to have access to them. So it hasn't actually officially fixed the problem that was supposed to be fixed and what people were upset about. It's how it's focusing on the picks and punishing every other club for something that people were upset about when their pool of players they could select from was too big. They needed to redo the zoning. They needed to redo that. That was not even addressed. So to me, that's a failure. And I'm all about trying to make it harder as well. But I think doing a big change like this within the draft, when clubs have banked their draft from last year or trade their picks to focus on the down, you need to make this change within 2 to 3 years. You need to say to the clubs, and to have Greg Swan say, all the clubs were happy with this. No, they weren't. They obviously weren't. It's a laughing joke. Really, honestly, it is an absolute joke. To come in this time of year, it's round 8, and they're coming in and making decisions for the rest of the season. Why don't you review it at the end of this season and then look after the draft and then say this will be the last draft that's not compromised by this change, and then next year we're going to implement the changes. That gives the teams, all 18 teams, a fair crack to go, okay, we will need to readjust next year. I think it should be a 2-year change so then clubs can filter out those picks because it's such a big change. And that's just not right. So, and I'm going to put my fan hat on in a sec. I'm going to put that Guernsey back there and put that on and tell what I think from a fan. I think that's just totally dodgy. You're picking on one of the little clubs. And the Port Adelaide's not a little club. They've got a lot of history. They've got a lot of respect. But as far as how the AFL view Port Adelaide, they didn't show any respect towards Port Adelaide. They didn't show any respect towards Carlton because these clubs have made the decisions. And yeah, okay, some clubs are just going to laugh at Port. They're going to laugh at Carlton. But the fact is, does it mean it's right? No, it's not. It's a knee-jerk reaction. The AFL have always had this problem of a knee-jerk reaction, and that's what goes to the rules. They change all these rules, and this is the other thing we're talking about. I could do a whole podcast just on the draft issue and changes. So it's not right, it's wrong. And the AFL have got it wrong. I agree there needs to be some changes. That's a fact. But implement it over a year or two, not just implement it straight away and ruin. There's so many clubs at the moment. And you know what? It's going to affect your club might not have a father-son or an NGA product, but in the future they are, and they're going to pay the price. And it didn't fix the fact that the Gold Coast can pick whoever they want from the pool they got. They didn't shrink the pool. They just shrunk everyone else's draft picks. And that sucks. That's a fact. Made it harder, yeah, that's a fact. But at the same time, they didn't address what needed to be fixed and what everyone else was upset about. Okay, that being said, that's the whole fan hat off, taking the hat off and going back to what I normally talk about. But yeah, didn't like it. I'm all for the change, but just implement it slower so clubs get the chance to filter out those picks and reassess. So we're going to talk about who runs the AFL, who actually runs the AFL, folks. Okay, we're going to talk about how these rule changes are made and the process of how these fundamental changes happen. Who signs it off? Who gives it the approval? Who looks over the oversight? So look, as everyone knows, Andrew Dillon, he's the AFL CEO. That's who Greg Swan reports to. Directly above Andrew Dillon sits the AFL Commission. Well, that is chaired by Craig Drummond. He is the top dog. So, that's the structure layer there, right? The AFL Commission is ultimately the governing body of the league. And Craig Drummond is the chair. And there's no one above that man. He's the one that signs off officially and makes the law of the game. The commission, well, it sets a big picture strategy. The rule changes are mostly handled by the laws of the game committee. So that is then gets recommended up to the commission for final approval. The commission, well, it has the final say on everything. The AFL's general manager of football operation runs the laws of the game committee. That's the role that chairs it. Right now, the position is held by Greg Swan, who's made all these changes. So Does that sort of come in and explains a bit of the structure? Who comes in, signs it off. He has to run it through the commission, essentially, Greg Swan. So yeah, the AFL commission only makes decision. Is the ultimate decision-making body. The Lords of the Game Committee, chaired by Greg Swan, only makes recommendations. The commission can accept, reject, or override them completely. They hold the final say on all rule changes. Craig Drummond, as a commissioner chair, can absolutely overrule any of Greg Swan's decisions and the Laws Committee. He's the boss, so if he wants to, he can tell Greg Swan he is wrong and change the course of the rules and the game itself. Craig Drummond, as a commissioner chair, can absolutely overrule Greg Swan, as we mentioned. And the AFL, as a company of board of directors, the AFL Commission sets the overall direction and approves the big decisions and can hire or fire the CEO. But day to day, they let the executives like Andrew Dillon run the show. Essentially, a corporate governance and governing body through it's a corporation. So the AFL is a business. It's run by stakeholders, which is all 18 clubs. They all should technically have a say. And so with Greg Swan, he did say all the 18 clubs must all agree that everything is so great and it's all rosy. Where I think a lot of clubs, if they spoke out against the rule changes, they get a slap with a fine. You can write that into anything you want. That's a general fact. That they will talk behind closed doors, but any club goes public about that they don't like the rules, or they criticize the umpiring, or more the rules than the umpiring, because the umpires, look, they have it hard, they interpret it. And how the commission signed off on an umpire working for a betting agency, I don't know how that worked. I'm just adding that in because I think that was wrong. So the commission, I feel like off that aspect, the commission got that one wrong. But here's more of the rule changes. So we talked about, before I get into that, we talked about structure. Okay, we got it goes through Greg Swan, goes up through into the commission, which is run by Drummond, and Drummond signs it off. Okay. Andrew Dillon sort of sits in there as a mediator and talks to the public and a little bit of everything, but he has no. He and Greg Swan can both be overrid by the commission. So the commission can come out and they can make a lot of changes. They have the executive power where they can veto a bill. They have the executive power to authorize change, or they can reject change. So there's a couple of branches of power, if that makes sense. So they and I'm okay with that. I don't think, to me, it's not I like checks and balances in a regulated thing like that. I think it's good to have checks and balances, but I'd like there to be the commission just not let Greg Swan make all these changes. I'll talk about how many changes he's made in a second overall. I just think they got to make the commission has to look at what 18 clubs think. They also have to look at the recommendations via Greg Swan, which is that's a part of the job. They also have to look at the fact that what the fans want is part of it, the AFL Players-Association, and also the umpires. So there's a few different avenues that they have to look at. So I get that, and that's also a part of the processing part that goes into the whole big thing. So, can the commission please just make some simple changes that they've the commission sometimes has to admit that the recommendations they passed have been wrong, and that's okay. That we want positive change. I'm all for some change if it makes the game better, but like it's I don't have any issue with no player being required to start in the goal square after goal's been kicked with the 6-6-6 rule. Okay, that's very little to negative. Last disposal free kick between the 50-meter arcs, that's a big change, and you could say it speeds up the game. It gets rid to me. It gets rid of more ruck work and the big man effect in the game. I do like the ball coming back into play. Yeah, that's cool, but like it's within here or there. It also stops players having a second break to sort of not rest, but just stop play and get ready for a clearance situation. So we talked a bit about that, and that's one thing to me that I feel it's a big change. That's a very, very big change. Like it's affected the actual play of the game. Players have had to run harder and faster. They're going to get into position more. It has impact on players' health, and like early on in the season we had a lot more hamstrings go this year, and it's taken a while for players to adjust to more speed in the game. But it's a big change. Kick-ins now are strictly 8 seconds, same as marks and frees. Play can restart without waiting for nominated ruckman. So like that's a rule change that they changed. Now they've gone back to the old way, which is good. You still hear some umpires yelling who they're going to throw the ball to. Just throw it up. They don't need to nominate. That's the whole reason why they changed the rule. Like that was how it originally was. They just threw it up. You could have third man up. So back in those days, shrugging in a tackle counts as prior opportunity. Well, we've seen some of them not paid, but they've been a bit better with that. That's a touchy one. Then you get tackled straight away. Like there was one where they put the arm out to sort of try to make an attempt. I guess as long as they make an attempt. But look, player inside 5 meters have to actually stand and can't back out. So that's the one where it's confusing as hell. That's one where it's just like, why'd they even bother changing that? Also, no centre bounce to restart the play. We've gone on over that. No substitute. We've gone through that. So there's, I think 9 rule changes, and only probably 3 of them are ones where you go, okay, that should be okay, really. The stand rule, that's just stupid. The rucks can't cross the line, that's 2. Last disposal, that's 3. I'm just going to say that as being a big change, so it can go either way of that one. The substitute, well, they've gone back to the original rule, just like the rucking one. The bounce, well, that's another negative one. Getting rid of that. It's 4. I mean, a lot of them are big changes and they're negative. I just see the bounce. They just have one bounce to start the game or after a goal. That's not that hard. But from official history that I've been able to find, 29 distinct rule changes or interpretations between 2016 and 2025. So almost 9 of that 20 have come from the start of this year. Some of the years have had just 2 or 3, others have had 7 or 8. So it gets messy. That's who runs the AFL. That's where the rule changes get thrown up and above, through to the top. We've talked about the amount of rule changes, so that's 29 in the last 10 years or so. So in 10 years, our game has had 29 rule changes. So where does anyone actually get that information on through their podcasts? How many podcasts out there that actually sit here and they talk about it. No one does great. No one looks at the facts like this. You don't get any of the facts of many of the main football shows. I sit here, and I'm lucky enough, I know enough how to find the information and look at what I need to look at and structure up a podcast to talk about it. And I've been negative on some of the rule changes, but I've also said some are good. I also said how they needed to be implicated. I have no issue with how the structure is. I was just explaining how the structure is. I would like the commission to reject some stuff that are really big changes to the game that should have been overlooked a little bit better and maybe applied. So, like the commission should have just flat out rejected getting rid of the centre bounce. That should have just been rejected. Should have just said, as the commission, we are saying no to that. That's what I would like the commission. The commission just ticked off on all these things. I don't know how much more was said. There could have been another 2 or 3 extra rule changes or more, or some may have been rejected. So we don't have that information. It's not like a public knowledge of that. But from what I've seen, there are a lot of changes that happened under Greg Swan's watch. Is it Greg Swan's personal opinion that he wanted all those things changed, or is it put together by the 18 clubs, the fan association, the umpires-association, the players-association? Is it a collective all put together, or has Greg Swan? Because Greg Swan come in and he was very opinionated on changing stuff like that. So, and just the comments on how the umpire has been some of the best umpiring that he's received feedback from the clubs. I don't actually necessarily agree with that. I think some of the umpiring has been horrible. Whether it's the rule changes, I'm not particularly going to just pick on an individual umpiring. Like the ducking into a tackle should be play on, but then there's some, like the St Kilda game against Port is a very good example. Liam Ryan does it twice, doesn't get called play on. Horn Francis gets tackled high. Yeah, it's my team. I'm just going to use it as an example and then last night Mackenzie tries to run to the mark, and then it just looks so horrible. And also the holding the ball. I think when the Wiz tackled more, it was clearly like holding the ball, and the umpire didn't call it. So from that aspect, the game was not very well officiated. The umpires have a very hard time because the AFL makes all these rule changes, and the commission just signs off on like 9 rule changes within a year, and they expect everyone to just deal with it. I think it's wrong. I think they need more. We talked about 29 rule changes within a decade. Is that too much? Yeah, I think it's too much. They've signed off on too much executive orders that are given power to the commission signing off on stuff. I think they just got some stuff wrong. I think the recommendations given by Greg Swan, via some of the rule changes, he's got some right, like no nomination for the rucks, so that's just reverting back to the old rule. So can we just have some stuff where we just go back to the old rules? I'm all about that. I'm probably more pro going back to how it was before 29 rule changes come through. I think like that to me is like, how many rule changes? We've had 29. How many of them are probably positive? We'll say, well, half of that's 14 or 14.5, whatever you want to say. How many of the 29 would be positive? How many of the 29 have they changed and then gone back to? So there's a couple of them just this year. Substitute, they got rid of. So they went from no substitute to having a substitute, back to no substitute, having a substitute, back to no substitute. And then they have the extra on the bench. Should always just be an extra on the bench. As soon as they bring in a substitute, they got rid of the ruckman on the bench. Now you've seen teams playing 2 ruckmen. Port, Versatini, Sweet. You got Hawthorn Reeves, Meek. You got Fremantle, Darcy before he got injured, and Luke Jackson. Well, now it's Mason Cox. You have Melbourne, Heath, and you got Gawn. You have Crows did it at one stage. You had multiple clubs all playing two ruckmen at once. That's a good thing for the game. If anything, they could add 6 on the bench, and I would be happy with that. I'm all for that, actually. I think they're like the positive changes they should do, not tinker with the actual gameplay. Tinkering with the gameplay is a risky thing, for my opinion. And Greg Swan coming in making 9 changes or so, and then tinkering with gameplay, getting rid of the centre bounce, getting the last touch rule, which from an aspect of it, look, it's cool, it gets kicked back in. The aesthetics to it is good, but don't forget about the traditional part of the game. It gets rid of a couple extra throw-ins. That gets rid of umpire involvement from the boundary, gets rid of the centre sort of players working their craft with the tap work from the boundary throw-in. It's not a real lot, but it's enough. It doesn't slow the game down. It makes it faster, meaning players are more likely to run harder for more in the game. So there's some positive and some negative, but it's a big change. You can get rid of the centre bounces, the whole stand rule. All you hear is umpire yell, stand, 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 where they would just put them on the mark and they could move sideways. Yeah, a lot of players can't kick 50 metres now. They have to run around on the side to kick it. Well, why don't we get more people to learn how to kick 50 metres if that's the case? It's not trying to make it easy all the time for players. Sometimes they just got to learn that's how it is. You could move sideways on the mark. You didn't have to just stand there. And then they're getting confused when they have to stand when they're 5 metres away. So they've gone from a player standing there to not being able to stand there to a player being 5 metres away, and then the umpire telling Nick Dacos to move when it should have been 50 if he was 5 metres in it. And then other players get 50. It's just so confusing. Doesn't make sense. Looks like it's horrible look for the game. The rucking thing going over the line, that's just another one. Should just been interpreted as the ruckmen have to jump. Simple as that. They have to make an attempt to jump. They would have stopped the body on body work. So just an overall category of this episode is we talked about who runs the show. We talked about the rule changes. We talked about why some of them aren't positive and why some are positive. So there's a little bit of everything. We don't want to criticize the umpires too much because they have to interpret the game that they're given. We haven't gone too hard after the system itself because there's lots of checks and balances that we would like to see more being used. We'd like to see the commission not sign off on so much and just tinker with things maybe a little bit slower. Can the recommendations from Greg Swan not be approved as much? Maybe they should approve too much. Can we just have more honesty of like stuff? They've changed too much. It's okay to say that we've got some stuff wrong. That's fine. And to just come out and stonewall everyone and say everything's perfect and all the clubs agree that it's not. That's not a good way of going about it. That's what I think. And that's my take, folks. It's been a bit frustrating from a football aspect. And a lot of the times they won't make these changes unless it hurts the bottom line. And that meaning like gate prices, and the money the game brings in. They're not going to make changes unless people get upset and stop. With it's like any product in the world. You stop buying it, people make decisions to make changes for the better. That's what I don't want because I don't want AFL to suffer in that way because I'd rather it not get to that point where people get upset about it because I love my football and I wanted to do this to explain the rules, explain the structure of how things are passed, and try to make positive out of it. It's my podcast is about being positive and not trying to be negative. But sometimes you got to highlight the negatives to get change to make it positive. Otherwise, you're not gonna have any change towards the good. And it takes a lot of honest opinion and work. Sometimes sometimes people have to admit when they just got some stuff wrong. They've done too much change. And that's the podcast, folks. Like and subscribe. Thank you.